Hello everyone, welcome to the Cinema Analysis channel. I'm Juzo. This channel will explore the hidden truths of films that are not usually revealed. Today I want to talk about silence. The operations to the Christians are drawn in the film. The protagonist is annoyed and suffered about what is believed through the experience. Although the believers are so suffering, why God keeps silence? Then he reaches a conclusion. The person who became his mentor is an unexpected person. Who was it? And what was the conclusion? I want to talk about it. And about the Japanese samurais who cornered the protagonists. Why did the Japanese authorities oppress the Christianity so much? I want to talk about it also. I suggest you watch the film first. So let's get started. So did you see the film? It must have been a series of scenes that Christians couldn't bear to look at straight. The original author, Shusaku ENDO, was a Christian. And the director of the film, Martin Scorsese, aimed to be a priest in the Catholic Church when he was younger, but he chose to make films instead. In 1988, Scorsese made the film The Last Temptation of Christ. Jesus got married in the film. He was portrayed as a being struggling with his desires and being annoyed like an ordinary human. At the time, massive movements against the film occurred. In one theater, the screen was torn and another theater was set on fire. That was when Scorsese came across Endo's silence, and it took him more than 20 years to make the film of the book. At the beginning of the film, a shocking report reaches the Society of Jesus. Jesuit Pereira, who has been doing missionary work in Japan, is said to have apostatized. Jesuit Pereira is a person who really existed, and his renounce is also a fact. The protagonists, Rodriguez and Garupe, the students of Pereira, headed to Japan. Far from finding out Pereira, they let the believers in Japan, who try to hide them, become victims. The more reverent a believer is, the more appallingly treated and dies. The less reverent one survives. The typical is the character Kichijiro. Rodriguez was betrayed by him and sold to the authority. Garupe was also killed. Rodriguez met again Ferreira, who had already apostatized, and Rodriguez also apostatized to save the lives of the faithful. Later, Rodriguez died in Japan. The small statue of Jesus was in his hand. Rodriguez, the protagonist of the story, has two mentors. One is the Jesuit Pereira. His renunciation came as a shock to Rodriguez. The other mentor is Kichijiro. This character was nothing but an object of hatred. Countless times he did humiliate, stepping on a plate of the statue of Jesus, and betrayed Rodriguez. And yet this person is his mentor. The theme of the film is how to think and what to do when you have to submit an irresistible power. A man must submit in the face of an irresistible force. The question is what to do after that. You will probably have to submit again. What should you do afterward? You may choose the wrong way and fail. You may choose the right way and succeed. If you choose the right way, you may not succeed. The challenge may go on forever. Every human being is just a weak existence. He has to submit in the face of an irresistible power. The symbol of this is Kichijiro. And Ferreira, who has apostatized, are the same in this respect. Scorsese says in an interview, Kichijiro is constantly, endlessly weak. He is weakening. He is always apparently getting weaker and weaker. He has damage to himself, to his family, to Rodriguez, everybody around him. And the paradox is that This is precisely what makes him Rodriguez's spiritual teacher, his real mentor. So it's about loving them. And now, we have compassion, and that's Kichijiro because he is the least of us. But that's who we are. Rodriguez and to some extent, Garupe, they have to give up their pride, give up their egos. Both of them have the illusion that they will be able to really control and define their own spiritual paths. But they can't do that. They want to choose their own penance, so to speak, make up for their sins or whatever. They can't choose it. It has to come from unexpected places and unexpected times, and that's what brings up Kichijiro. I always think of what Jesus said. The quote, "What you do to the least of me, you do to me." In a sense, someone like a person who will pay you the most is the one who teaches you, as Jesus say. When I was really young, around 20, 21, I had this idea to make a film about a priest at the time who needed to take that extra step and became a priest, getting past his ego and his spiritual pride, because it's the people he's take care of, the parishioners, the flock. I always wanted to make that story, and as I was doing this, I realized that, in a sense, that this film may be that story. The quote from Jesus is probably Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." This is a very esoteric expression to interpret. The other esoteric expression like this is verse 29 before that. "For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him." What is expressed in this chapter 25 are metaphors of Jesus. The essence seems to be that people will continue in the direction they have chosen. Someone who tries to make an effort will make more effort and get the result. Someone who tries to be good will be better. Someone who continues to be evil will become more evil. The rich will get richer, the poor poorer. People are divided into sheep and goats. The sheep, the good people, will be welcomed in heaven, and the goats, the bad people, will be sent to hell. The reason given is the story of the least of these. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." This is the word given to the people called sheep, and the following is the word given to the people called goats. "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." Probably the least means the weakest in the world, people who are weaker than you. Your behavior towards the weaker expresses your spiritual nature. God is watching and you will be judged. This is my interpretation of the metaphor of the least of these. Martin Scorsese, on the other hand, interprets from a different angle. The least means troublemakers. They appear before you and cause trouble. The problems you have to overcome appear before you in the form of troublemakers. You can't grow up without dealing with your troublemakers. That is why your life mentor appears as your troublemaker. In this film, it is Kichijiro. The writer also apostatizes. The protagonist of the film that Scorsese tried to make when he was younger was also a priest. To overcome ego and pride is the issue to the protagonist. It appears as the parishioners or the flock whom he takes care of. The concept is the same as this film, Silence. Scorsese describes it this way. The English version of this novel is said to have several mistranslations. There certainly are, as I have noticed. For example, read the following sentences. They are written in English version. The priest squatted on the ground, his hunched shoulders bathed in the silver moonlight that pierced the bars of his prison. His wasted form was reflected on the wall. Sometimes he gave a start as a cockroach chirruped in the trees. And this is my translation. The priest sat straight on the floor. His shoulders, which reduced flesh bathed in the silver moonlight through the bars of the window. The shadow of his thin figure was reflected on the wooden wall. Now and then, probably startled by something, a brown cicada in the thicket of trees flipped away chirping. The floor of the prison where Rodriguez is imprisoned is written as a wooden floor, so floor would be better than ground. And aburazim should be translated as brown cicada or oil cicada, so cockroach is completely wrong. However, this translator has done some significant translations. For example, isn't it a pity to throw it away? The Japanese expression is said to be a dialect of Nagasaki, where the protagonist visited. Most Japanese people don't understand this expression, and this translator has translated it perfectly. The believers tread on Fumie. They betray God and Jesus Christ. This is how it is expressed in the English version of the original story. If you don't apostatize, he said, the peasants will be suspended in the pit. But actually, the expression in the original Japanese version is different. If I interpret it directly, if you don't fall down, the peasants will be suspended in the pit. The Japanese word korobu means to fall, to tumble, or to be seduced. It is not the word that has a serious impression. The Japanese samurais of the time or the authorities may have considered renouncing the faith, which is an extremely serious matter, to be a light thing. This is how Scorsese described it in an interview. Fall, korobu, get down, and it doesn't matter. If you get up, you're gone, you're finished. You'll never overcome it. But there's maybe more Mediterranean, Italian way of looking at it, which is I find here similar. You try to be stronger next time. That's the key. And maybe you'll make it. Maybe you're just not meant to be strong. Does that mean the means are ostracized? You deny love of God? No, this is the key. If you fall down, you just have to get up. The act of renouncing faith is not an easy one for believers in monotheism. However, there are times when we are faced with a situation in which we must commit a serious sin. It is possible that you will betray Jesus countless times, as Kichijiro did. No matter how you commit a serious sin, the important thing is to get up from there. That must be the message of Endo and Scorsese. In the film, The Last Temptation of Christ, even Jesus is portrayed as someone who can't resist temptation. The works of Martin Scorsese continue to portray the weakness of each person. The protagonists always continue to be triffled with enormous power. They can't live as they wished and be defeated. How to face defeat seems to be the theme of his works. You've just got to get up if you fall down. The film has a different ending to the original story. In fact, the episodes of Rodriguez, whose religious renunciation was not fully trusted by the authorities, are written at the very end of the novel. The episode of Kichijiro, who was discovered with Christian goods and arrested, which was also depicted in the film, was also included in this section. This part is written in Old Japanese, which is difficult to read even for Japanese people. Presumably few Japanese readers have read this part securely. The actual climax is when Rodriguez hears the voice of God. Shusaku Endo's intention was to let the reader hear the sound using only letters. The sound of God's voice. Even Christians say that you cannot hear the voice of God unless you are a prophet. Certainly, sound media can express the voice of God. But is it possible to make readers feel the sound of God's voice through the expression of the novel, which has only letters? This must be the challenge of the author. The first half of the novel consists of letters written by Rodriguez. The letters are written in the first person. After Rodriguez has been betrayed by Kichijiro and captured by the Japanese authorities, the chapters are written in the third person. The points of view are mainly those of the protagonist. If this was the case, it could have been expressed in the first person. The author could have let Rodriguez tell the story. However, these chapters express Rodriguez as the priest or he. The word I only appears in dialogue. This must be the technique of novel by Shusaku Endo. The writings written in the first person will make the readers sympathize to the protagonist easily. Ones in the third person make distance. The readers will overview the protagonist in desperation from distant place. After Rodriguez was taken, the writing turns into the ones in the first person from the third person when he addresses God. Writing in the first person makes it easier for the reader to sympathize the main character. Writing in the third person creates distance. The reader is forced to distance himself from the desperate protagonist. After Rodriguez is captured, the text becomes first person when he addresses God. Just before he steps on the Fumie, the text shifts to the first person of Rodriguez who is suffering. Then, just as he is about to step on the Fumie, it changes back to the third person. And the words that seem to be God's forgiveness are written in the descriptive part of the text. No brackets are used. This Japanese sentence seems to describe the image of the protagonist. As for the use of the parentheses in Japanese sentences, parentheses are often used to explain things and express inner feelings. And this type of brackets represents the words spoken aloud. Later, he remembers God's voice of forgiveness at the moment. It's in parentheses. This is his imagination. Rodriguez trampled on Fumie, announced to apostatize, and changed his name. Kichijiro appeared in front of him and asked him to listen to his confession. At the time, Rodriguez read the Christ's word, trample, again in his mind. Rodriguez said aloud, "Lord, I resented your silence." After that, the phrase came, "I was not silent. I suffered beside you." It means to be exactly spoken expression, and that Rodriguez heard God's voice. Before that, God's words were between parentheses, and he was not sure whether they were just his imagination or not. The subject changed into I, then he listened to God's voice. Then the story ends. The way to use brackets in the English version is different from the original version. In the film, the depiction of Christ is different from the original story. In the original story, the place where Rodriguez was captured was the one without water. In the film, he was captured at the riverside. Before that, when he drinks some water, the vision of Christ's face reflected on the surface of the river. Rodriguez started to laugh. He thought he was out of his mind. and when he was going to trample on Fumie, and also when he listened to Kichijiro's confession, he heard Christ's voice, as in the original story. In the film, Rodriguez addressed God in his mind. His lips were not moving at the time, and Christ's voice was heard. The conversation between Rodriguez and Christ took place only in his mind. Christ's portrayal in the film seems to be only an imagination in Rodriguez's mind, and it is not a real climax of the film. After Rodriguez dies, we see a statue of Christ in his hands, and the film ends. The cut symbolically expresses that he didn't throw away God in his mind, even though he pretended to apostatize. It probably means that Rodriguez continued to believe in God even if the vision he thought was just an illusion. You can continue to believe even if you don't have any reason to. Even if you fall down, you can continue to challenge. It is expressed symbolically. Films and novels use different methods of expression, so the film probably took a different approach. Rodriguez, the protagonist of the film, trampled the plate of the statue of Christ. Yet at the end of the film, the statue of Christ was in his hand. Even though he pretended to have apostatized, he hadn't abandoned his faith in his mind. The dead protagonist is placed in a coffin. His wife tries to put a mamorigatana in the coffin. This is a small knife used as a talisman to protect the spirits of the dead from evil spirits. I want you to watch this scene again. When she tries to get her husband to hold the knife, she stops the movement. In a close-up of her face, the camera cuts back to her hand, and the knife is tucked into his clothes. Why is this expression used? It must be the director's intention. She probably noticed the cross in his hand. That's why she stopped moving and the camera showed her face in close-up. Don't you think her face expresses something? Okada Sanremon, whose name Rodriguez inherited, was the person who really existed. He is said to have converted to Christianity and died a martyr. His left family must have also converted to Christianity and were forced to apostatize later. Giuseppe Chiara, the real person who became the model for Rodriguez, also married the woman. Both of them stepped on Fumie, and they probably didn't talk about Christianity. And later, Rodriguez's wife found the statue in his hands and probably felt pleasure. That's probably because she hadn't apostatized in her mind like her husband. The expression means that she suppressed her joy. This is just my interpretation. What is faith? It is to regard something true without cause. When someone acknowledges something with cause, it is expressed as knowing. When someone acknowledges something without cause, it is called believing. If Latin or something else were to strike those who oppress Christians, that might prove the existence of God. But God remains silent. He doesn't give any proof. The question is whether you can believe in this. At least God doesn't seem to reward humans while they are alive. There is also no basis for whether there is a life after death. Can you still believe it? It's never easy. I think this work depicts that. The subject of this film must be very important to Christians, but it must also be important to those who are not Christians. The question is whether you can continue to believe it and challenge it. If you replace God with your goal, the same thing can be said. You may have some goals that you want to achieve, and there's no proof that you can achieve them. You will make innumerable mistakes. You may not succeed in your lifetime. Can you still keep trying? Isn't that the value of continuing to challenge yourself? Is it that there is value in being strong? Is it that being weak has no value? That is wrong. Getting up is important, even if you fall down. Now, the Japanese authorities in the film oppressed the protagonists, Christians. Why did they oppress so much? I want to talk about it also. Japan did not suppress Christianity in the past, nor does it do so now. The suppression began a little before the period depicted in the film, and for almost 300 years after that, Japan continued sakoku. Sakoku means to close the country, but it does not mean to break off diplomatic relations with foreign countries completely, but to restrict them considerably. After this restriction, Christianity came back to Japan, and now 1% of Japan's population are Christians. Japan is considered a country of polytheism. Whatever God you believe in, it doesn't matter. That kind of attitude would be the definition of polytheism in Japan. This means that Japan is a country where diversity counts. That is why the arrival of Christianity in the mid-16th century was not seen as a problem. But in the late 16th century, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who ruled Japan at the time, issued Bartering Edict. It was to exclude Christianity. The document mainly states the following. Daimyos forced their people to convert to Christianity. Christians destroyed Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples, and they oppressed Buddhist priests and refused harmony with them. Christian daimyos sell their people as slaves to foreign countries. Christian daimyos look for an opportunity to subvert the state. These are forbidden. Daimyo means ruler of his region, boss of the samurais in each region. The Bartering Edict required Hideyoshi's permission to convert a daimyo of considerable power, but not a daimyo who is not. This edict does not in itself object to individuals choosing to convert to Christianity. The problem is that those who have power coerce those who do not have it. In Japan, where diversity is important, imposing one set of values is a serious problem. The modern Christian world may value respect for diversity, but not in the 16th century. The Christian missionaries advertised, "If you don't believe in Christianity, you will go to hell." In the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 3, it says, "You shall have no other gods before me." In the first chapter of Genesis, it says that on the sixth day, after God had begun to create the world, God made man and gave him dominion over all other life on earth. It is the idea of man ruling over nature. According to traditional Japanese ideas, man worships nature and his ancestor and is a part of the great existence. Thus, the Christian idea does not fit in with the traditional Japanese idea. And what is human? The Christian idea. This may be true of Abrahamic religions as a whole. Seems to have a tendency to consider only the Christian believer as a human being. Man rules all other life. That means there's no problem with making pagans into slaves. Of course, most Christians today were denied this. If we look at the real history, were pagans considered human beings or not? Everyone knows that many people were taken to the American continent as slaves. The reason would be that they just wanted slaves. The reason why black people were chosen was racism. But they used the fact that they weren't Christians or that they didn't understand the Christian idea effectively to justify it. In fact, many people were sold as slaves to foreign countries for similar reasons in Japan. The Christian daimyos ordered people to convert to Christianity, and they sold the people who refused to convert to foreign countries as slaves. They could have connections with the Western European Christian world, and they could get gunpowder in exchange for slaves. It was possible that they could strengthen their army and subvert the state. This could have led to more war, and many people could have become victims. Nearly 50,000 Japanese are said to have been sold abroad as slaves. There was no slave system in Japan except for the slave trade of the Christian daimyo. So it was predictable that diversity would be lost from Japanese society, that people would be sold as slaves, and that the country would suffer war by accepting Christianity. It is right that such a thing should never be acceptable to Japanese society. So Hideyoshi's prohibition of Christianity and its continuation later on was a natural thing to do. Abrahamic religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, Islam, in short, monotheism, regard only their own system of values as absolute. If the existence of monotheism is allowed in the world of polytheism, the world of polytheism will be destroyed in due course. This is natural because monotheism never recognizes polytheism. The typical example is the collapse of the Roman Empire. Protecting diversity is not easy. To recognize the existence of different ideas is diversity. Sometimes war may be necessary. Sometimes we have to commit cruel acts. So why am I mentioning this silence? Christian believers may have already known about it. Don't you think that the same situation in Japan as shown in the film is happening all over the world? The modern Christian world is beginning to value diversity. And if people who recognize diversity recognize people who don't, the existence of the people who recognize diversity will be destroyed. You probably have something on your mind. There are people who need monotheism. There is nothing wrong with them pursuing it in their own world, in their own country or region. It is not even something that should be a problem. However, they impose their values on other people as God's will. For people with different values, it is no different than a disaster. For example, in a scripture of a religion, it is described as cut off the head of the pagan when you meet him. A devout follower of that religion will do just that. If it is really done, the pagans will react against it, and it may be an obstacle to missionary work. What is really done is to increase the number of believers in pagans' area. Sometimes this is done by a form of missionary work, sometimes by a form of immigration. In one region of a country, by increasing the number of immigrants, dishes made from the traditional ingredients of the area have been ceased to be served in school caterings. School swimming pools will be separated for boys and girls. Destruction of religious facilities. Violation to an attractive woman because she is considered a prostitute. There are people who think this is a good thing. But for people with different values, it can only be a disaster. It is ironic that tolerance to achieve diversity destroys diversity. One should never accept ideas or actions that are against diversity in order to protect diversity. We should judge properly and act so as not to let the difference in value system cause tragedies. We should protect the world in which every person can live as they wish. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked this video, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up.